All right, looks like we are live now. Good morning, Roshan.
Hey, good morning, Gunjan.
Hey, also, folks who have joined us live on YouTube or listening to this live, a very good morning to you all. Welcome to the first Startup Operator Weekly Roundup for the month of March. We have a host of interesting insights and conversations waiting for you. But before that, Roshan, so India won the Test series against England 3-1 after the defeat in day one. How does that? How
Yeah,
does it make?
yeah, I'm missing another glorious day of Test cricket today, but absolutely no complaints at all on that front. I think the boys have demonstrated, who's boss in this series. Fantastic for cricket and fantastic for India.
Right. So I guess the next one is on 12th of March, right? It's going to be played in Ahmedabad. The
Oh, is there?
T20,
Yeah, I think.
T20 series.
Yeah, I guess the T20 starts after this. Yeah, interesting.
My, let's so
Nothing
it's
like
going to be
Test
an
cricket, though,
exciting.
man.
It's going to be an exciting month for sure. All right, so we'll get started with the roundup. So this week we put out a very interesting episode as part of our engineering manager series, wherein we interviewed Sujay Koduri, who leads engineering at Vimo, right? So Vimo is one of the fastest growing enterprise tech startups in the world. And Sujay, before he took up the reins to lead the engineering team, he was working as a senior engineering manager with 247.ai. For folks who haven't listened to the episode yet, in this episode, Augustus and Roshan talk to Sujay to find out how he manages engineering in such a hyper growth startup and much more. So, Roshan, what can our subscribers expect from this episode?
Yeah, so Sujay is a fantastic engineering leader. One thing that amazed me when I first joined Waymo was the number of customer calls that Sujay would do, right? It almost seemed like every hour he was on some customer call or the other. And he spoke about, how he developed that customer centric mindset, developing that empathy for the user and the business person as such, which is super important for developers as such to understand the end impact of their code. See, there are numerous nuances to operating in the enterprise domain, right? So, quite often the user is not the buyer, right? Often, I mean, you have to work with legacy technology. And to make that next digital leap forward, you really have to integrate and play with all of the others from many years before, right? All of that tech and integrating with that stack is not a trivial thing. Specifically with Waymo, we operate in financial services, so which means data, privacy, scalability, all of those things are super important, right? It's not like the app will crash and okay, it's just too bad you can't post a photo. The app can crash and probably cause many $1 million worth of damage to the end customer, right? So these things have to be very 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 deliberately thought out and stuff like that. So it was a fantastic chat, and the amazing thing for me is that every new engineering leader that we speak to is bringing a unique perspective to the table, and I'm really having a lot of fun, doing this. So go check out that episode if you haven't. You will learn a ton of things about engineering, and both from if you're an engineer and if you're a non-engineer, there's a lot of value in this.
Um, so you mentioned, right, every engineer is bringing his own unique set of insights. What was unique about this episode?
See, the unique thing was the enterprise element that Sujay brought in, right? Which is, how do you deploy? How do you deploy, for instance, if one of the largest banks is going live? How do you deploy for, hundreds or tens of thousands of users? It's not a trivial thing. You can't get people in a room, explain the nuances of the application, right? Numerous levels of hierarchy, numerous levels of information architecture, etc., right? So this is not a trivial thing. So onboarding this is again is amazing, right? And that I think is unique to this episode. Also, I mean, there are a lot of overlaps in terms of building engineering culture itself, right? I mean, we just spoke to Pankaj of Zendrive, and he had a different take on this versus Sujay, right? And yeah, so everyone is pretty unique in that sense.
All right, really excited for this. So let's get started with the fundraise news of the week. Tiger Global is apparently in advanced talks with Grow to raise over $100 million in investment. Tiger Global is likely to bring in 50 million to the 100 million funding round, which will value the startup close to $1 billion. To tell you a bit about Grow was founded around mid 2016 by former Flipkart executives Lalit Keshre, Harsh Jain, Neeraj Singh, and Ishan Bansal, and they were part of Y Combinator's 2018 cohort. This deal, if it goes through, it will be the third investment by the New York-based investment fund in the online investment sector, and the earlier investments included Upstocks and Indwealth. Today, Grow has over 10 million registered customers, and they primarily target the Gen Zs or the new to age investment customers. And their competitors include the likes of Zerodha, Upstocks, and Paytm Money. So we have seen these investment platforms on the rise over 2020, especially during the lockdown. So how do
Yeah.
you see this space expanding or evolving in 2021 or in the times to come?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had record number of investors come into the market last year, right? I think about approximately 20 million people trade in equities. That's about 1.5% of the population, right? Which is, I mean, needless to say, there's a lot of room for growth. Uh, it's also, if you look at this brokerage firm space, Zerodha is the highest. I think they have about 3.14 million users as of last month. Sorry, as of January, they're doing about 1,000 plus crores in revenue, and what's amazing is that they have an EBITDA of 55+%, right? So needless to say, this is a fantastic business to be in. I think after Zero, the Upstock is second, and second by far. I think they have half the number of users and a tenth of the revenue. So to me, I mean, this whole space is you can broadly divide it into two, right? So you have the Zero, the Upstocks, Grow, and the rest of the fintechs versus some of the other conventional folks like ICICI Securities, HDFC, Kotak, Angel Broking, Motilal Oswal, and the likes. And you know what Zerodha has proved, rather what all of these this entire cohort of fintechs have proved, is that user experience can be a very good customer acquisition strategy, right? I mean, so I remember, opening a demat account in 2008, and man, it was a nightmare. I had to sign 20 pages of documents, and then it was the whole UX of it was so intimidating that I really gave up. I mean, I didn't bother investing for a whole 10 years after that, right? And compared to now, when it's so simple, seamless, right from the KYC to the actual investing, this is amazing. So of course there's another two segments here. I mean, Zerodha is completely bootstrapped, right? While the others have raised a boatload of money, and we'll see how that works, right? So how these two businesses kind of go forward and scale. Grow, if I'm not mistaken, is at about 50 lakhs revenue, much smaller, and mainly I think people are using it for investing in mutual funds at this point of time.
Right.
Has some stellar investors on board, Sequoia and now Tiger backing them. Interestingly, they have about 10 million plus users, right? Um,
Right.
so really excited for how things are going on this front. I think overall this entire financialization, access to financial products is a net positive, as we've said before. So yeah, I mean, this is a fantastic space. It'll grow. It'll become a lot more interesting as the times in the times ahead, for sure.
No, I really couldn't agree more. And talking about Tiger Global, even the next fundraise that we have had is by another one by Tiger Global, which is around 80 to 100 million in the health tech space, right? They're investing in Pristyn Care as part of the Series D funding. With this fundraise, Pristyn Care would be valued close to 500 to 600 million dollars, right? And the startup was founded by Harsim Arbir Singh, Vaibhav Kapoor, and Garima Sani to provide patient-centric healthcare services from disease to health. Right? They have expanded massively in India with over 80 clinics, 400 partner hospitals, and over 140 in-house specialty surgeons. And within during the lockdown, we saw right how important remote healthcare actually became.
Hmm.
So, and we have spoken to a lot of health tech entrepreneurs in the Startup Operator podcast. How do you see this evolving now that things are opening up?
Yeah, so See, if you look at the hospital business, right? I mean, it's huge capex, highly regulated. It's a very difficult business to run, and we're seeing the relatively asset-light models that are taking shape right now, and I think this is the way to go forward, especially given everything that happened in 2020, right? And we saw like how some of these remote healthcare trends picked up, like telemedicine and so on. Pristyn Care, I think they have OT spaces and doctors on roll, and they have some way of optimizing these OT spaces, right? So basically, the occupancy of these operation theaters are quite low, and they're able to sync with all of these hospital networks to basically maximize the utilization of these operation theaters. They focus on non-emergency or elective surgery, so the risk is relatively less reduced. I'm not sure who takes on the risk here in this case. I think if they have doctors on board on roll, I think probably Pristyn would be assuming that risk of risk of the surgery as such, right? But there are other companies out there, I think like Medfin and so on, who probably pin that risk on the hospitals or the healthcare systems instead, right? And cost of the surgeries, I think they probably vary between 20,000 to a lakh. So again, which is reasonably high ticket size. So yeah, they could spend a bunch of money on acquisition. I think this money will go towards that itself, right? To build a partner network and to acquire these customers. So overall, I think it's a good thing. I mean, we have to see this kind of innovation in healthcare, right? Because I don't see us having that sort of institutions here, like elsewhere in more developed countries, right? So yeah, I mean, any kind of healthcare innovation is obviously net positive. Um, I want to quickly talk about Tiger, right? So it's almost like Tiger is saying Tiger Zinda hai, right? We saw last week that Zomato and Infra Market had raised money. Zomato, I think about 250 million, and Infra Market was probably around 50 or thereabouts. I think, I'm not very sure. Earlier, before that, we saw Ally.io raise money as well, and then this week with Grow and Pristyn, there's a heck of a lot of money coming in, and Tiger is like deploying all of this, right? I think they raised a new venture fund of 3.75 billion earlier this year, right? Scott Schaefer, who's at the helm, is again very bullish about India. See, Tiger and LeafXL really put Indian startup ecosystem on the map, right? With investing in Flipkart in 2010. That was a fantastic outcome for them. I think they invested probably all in all about $1 billion and got about $3.5 billion when Flipkart exited to Walmart. And LeafXL is famous for his lightning quick deals, right? So and this is especially interesting because these are growth stage deals, which require a lot of diligence and everything else, and it's very slow moving. But yeah, I mean, I see a lot more growth stage funds coming into India, a lot more capital being deployed here for various reasons, as we mentioned earlier. And this is amazing. I think we're going to see Tiger in the news more often in the weeks ahead, for sure.
Right. Okay, so next we have Cashify in the news. Cashify, though it's an online reseller, they'll be raising $15 million as part of its Series D funding, which will be led by Olympus Capital's Clean Energy and Sustainability arm, Asia Environmental Partners. So this company was founded in 2013 and today has over 800 employees, and they deal in used mobile phones, plans to use, they deal with used mobile phones. So most of this amount, the money that will be raised will be used for market expansions, and they'll be increasing their offline footprint as well. And in this business, right, where you're buying used materials and selling it back to OEMs, this is a space that has been around for a while but hasn't gotten much market prominence. But Cashify is saying that within the next 6 months they'll be going profitable. So what is your what picks your brain within this space?
It's a very interesting space, as you mentioned. I mean, so here are a couple of statistics, right? Nearly 20% of people upgrade their phone in a year, and twice that number of people upgrade their phone in 2 years. So 40% of people upgrade their phone in 2 years. Now that's a lot of pre-owned phones in the market, man, right? And I think Cashify is trying to streamline that segment essentially. The other aspect is that, look, I mean, as Indians, we are price conscious and also we are brand conscious, right? So we want to buy Apple phones, but do we want to pay the lakh and whatever it costs? I don't know, right? And considering that these phones dip in value, I think by 20-30% within the moment you buy these phones, right? So it could be a fantastic deal. I mean, if someone were to refurbish these phones and, like, certify them and so on, which is what Cashify is doing. In fact, I sold my iPhone on Cashify 3 or 4 years ago. It was a very, very seamless process, and I think I got a good deal, right? So whoever has my phone, I hope he's not listening. So, right. See, what also is happening is that, given the times and people are cost cutting with COVID and everything, people might think that this is a very good alternative to access like value, right? So curiously, also what I saw with this particular deal is that they're raising this money to invest in their SaaS software, which they've developed in-house to run their operations, and they've been selling this abroad, Israel, Brazil, and so on. So, which is again pretty amazing, right? It's very interesting that they have different streams of revenue, and it should be interesting, yeah, going forward.
Right. So next we have Razorpay's ESOP buyback, and ESOPs has been something which we have been seeing in the news quite often now, right? So for Razorpay, all existing and former employees of the company, whoever holds vested stocks, they'll be eligible to sell up to 33% of their shares, and majority of these shares will be bought by Sequoia Capital and GIC, which are Razorpay's key investors. And this is not the first stock ESOP's buyback by Razorpay, right? They had announced the first encashment in November 2018 for almost 140 or 150 employees. And the second round had occurred in November 2019, in which around 400 employees were eligible. Now, we have been discussing ESOPs over the past few editions, right? There was Cred, Zomato, Swiggy. And if this is becoming a trend, what impact does this have on the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, a liquidity event always creates optimism in the ecosystem, right? And typically, liquidity is like through IPO or acquisition. Considering that IPOs don't happen as often, it's only acquisitions, right? And acquisitions are rare, right? Strategic acquisitions are quite rare. And it's a net positive for everyone involved, right? Early stage employees get a way to liquidate their stocks, so it's not some imaginary asset that they own, right? The founder gets to repose his or her confidence in the vision, right? And then the existing investors get to increase their stake in the company and have more skin in the game. So all of this is super, super, super positive, right? And I think Razorpay, this is probably the third time they've announced the ESOP buyback. It just shows the amount of confidence that they have, and why not, right? They're killing it, and it just, like, if you look at the ambition of some of these startups, right? I mean, this is another validation of that ambition. The fact that, hey, we're here and we're going to go out and conquer, right? It's amazing. It's really, really amazing. I think it should happen more regularly. And just so that, for the folks who work at these startups as well, right? It's like, it's not this mythical moment in time when they actually cash in on this. I mean, they actually have a path to, a path to riches, right? In some sense. And ultimately, all this valuation and everything is more maya, right? Cash matters, and good to see the founders, give some back to the early employees. Yeah, and this is another tiger funded company. They turned unicorn last year, I think, in September or
Yes.
October, based on their last round. So fantastic news. More people should do it, I think. We've covered Zomato, Unacademy, and a few others do the ESOP buybacks. This is
Yeah.
another one to the list.
I think we should have a separate section or an episode on ESOP buybacks in the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, talking about hypergrowth startups, right? Very interesting story came across last week, which was the growth story for RedX Delivery. RedX is one of Bangladesh's leading logistics platform, and it started off as a small in-house business in Dhaka, right? They were planning for national expansions, but their volume alone was not sufficient to justify the investment. So they moved to a BHAG model, right, which is bold, hairy, audacious goal, which is a clear and a compelling target for an organization to strive for. And since then, things have turned for them, right? Once they set on to this path, within 6 weeks, they launched Pan Bangladesh, and this was the 1st of March 2020. Since then, they've decided to create hubs in main locations and used home offices for their operations. And each of this home office today has been converted into a proper full-fledged hub for to manage the volumes it manages. During COVID, much like Dunzo, COVID was a blessing in disguise for these folks, and I guess they're close to becoming a unicorn now. So this so it's great to see stories from the neighboring countries as well, right? But do you see Indian startups exploring countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka as markets for expansion?
Yeah, I'll come to that, but just a word before that about Sujayat Ali, man, who's the founder. I mean, this guy is like, I won't even call him a phoenix. He's like a serial phoenix. He's like the founder who doesn't give up, right? So Sujayat founded Vonik, I think, in 2013 or something of that sort. Vonik was in all kinds of trouble. They've done countless pivots. I mean, a couple that I remember, probably four or five. To end up here, right? I think the last I heard was they did a merger with ShopUp of Bangladesh, and that's really where they've landed here. So amazing guy, amazing perseverance that he's showing, right? And it's great they launched this internally, and I think looks like they've just extended it to others out there. And running a logistic business during COVID requires some balls, right? Um uh, with respect to other startups expanding to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, adjoining countries. I mean, look, the market dynamics may be quite similar, right? But then, who has done well in these companies in these countries? I think Bangladesh's economy is doing well. They're pretty good, but not so much with Nepal and Sri Lanka, and lesser said the better with Pakistan, right? So yeah, I could only find one other startup, Ecom Express, which is invested in Paperfly, and coincidentally, this is also in the e-commerce logistics space in Bangladesh, right? Um, just a thought: what would be a game changer is if Jio expands its network to these countries and brings more people online. I mean, Bangladesh at this point of time is fairly covered. I think 63% something of its population is online. But hey, cheap internet could create access, and it'll also be interesting to see how Geo offers its services through the Geo store itself, right? So I think we covered last roundup where Geo tied up with Kalari Capital, and they're going to be investing in early stage apps and services, etc. So they'll have a full suite of apps and services to offer, right? And I think a meaningful extension or market expansion to these countries may happen through something like a Geo, I think. Yeah. But overall, props to Sujayat, props to the RedX team, and amazing work, guys.
Yep, more power to them. Um, so next we have Flipkart IPO on the news again, right? And recently there's an article put up which kind of debated on which way will Flipkart go towards its IPO. Will it be listing as a SPAC in US, considering its parent company Walmart is situated there, or will it take a traditional IPO route? Now, just to talk a bit about this, right? The growing number of Indian tech startups that have been considering the SPAC route, right? And they are primarily choosing it because of less regulatory scrutiny, and it also gives these companies more certainty over the valuation they'll have, right? And the funds that they will raise. I mean, just to give an example, India's largest renewable energy firm, Renew Power, last month struck a deal with a blank check company to go public in the US, while SoftBank's Growers also is in talks with SPACs. And in the coming months, a dozen more Indian tech and internet startups are expected to choose that route to go public. So I want to understand, you have been reading about SPACs and talking to founders, right? So what is this whole SPACs versus IPO story?
We covered SPACs, I think, in one of our roundups earlier. So, SPAC or Special Purpose Acquisition Company has been around for a while, but then over the last 2 or 3 years, given all the IPO action, it's gained a lot more traction, right? Chamath is one of the leading proponents of this, and there are a few other bulls as well, right? So, in 2020 alone, there were, I think, $25 billion worth of SPACs. Uh, for again, as you rightly mentioned, there are fewer regulatory hurdles than an IPO. to access public money. So that's the positive that the companies are seeing, right? Essentially, it's a blank check, right? So you form a shell company with the sole purpose of acquiring another company, and you have a management team that goes and sets about to do it, right? Flipkart, I think the valuation or what valuation they're seeking is about 35 to 40 billion dollars, and GrowFirst is exploring a similar route as well. Flipkart needs that money, man, and I can quite sympathize, right? I mean, they're up against Amazon and Reliance, so they are trying different alternatives to do this. SEBI has eased some of the listing norms, like reducing the holding period, and there are a few other nuances to that. But it's still very, very difficult to list a company in India. Yeah, I mean, I quite sympathize with why they are considering the SPAC route, but I would rather see them go IPO here, right? Because what it does for the ecosystem, it signals that others can do it as well. For a long while, I think we've discussed this, right? That companies setting up in Singapore, getting invested by US firms or Chinese firms, and then listing in Nasdaq or this SPAC route and stuff. It's fine, I guess. I mean, you have to do what you have to do, but then I would really love to see some IPOs in India, and I would love to invest in apps and services and companies that I use on a regular basis. So let's see how this plays out. Interesting.
Right. Um, so yeah, moving on to Vembu's wisdom, right? So I think this is a pretty old tweet by Vembu sir, in which he talks about the aspirations of hope and patience. So for folks who are listening to us on audio, I'll just read out the tweet for you. Vembu sir talks, when a creative field has hit the ceiling of its S curve, the existing centers of the field become stale. A new vista does not usually open up from within the dominant center, but out from the fringes. Moving away is to liberate oneself from the confines of a stagnant field. And later on, they're like, it's a thread of 2 3 tweets which goes on to talk about Wembusser's PhD experience, right? How he had to let it go halfway, but and what a challenge it was. And then leaving the offices of Zoho, then I'm moving to his village, back to his village some time back. That's a journey to undertake, right? But at the end of the day, it all pays off if you believe in it. Any
Yeah.
thoughts that you would like to add on to this?
Yeah, this is another fantastic thread, and one that everyone should sort of read and rethink everything that they're doing, right? So I think innovation happens at the edges. We've all seen that. It never happens in the mainstream. Considering that how functions overlap, or rather they are overlapping at this point of time. I mean, I spoke about this with Pankaj. I mean, today a developer has to have a little bit of a product mindset, a customer mindset, has to have some amount of data science capabilities, augmentation, etc. Right? Aside from the actual code that he's going to deploy. So it's a lot more holistic, and the fact that generalists thrive in startups, man. I mean, it's a universal rule, right? Especially in the 0 to 1 or the 1 to 10 journey, startups love generalists. Couple of things that I also thought of is how problems that have been solved in different domains can be utilized in domains other than them, right? So just to think of a simple example, the airline industry has solved this whole optimization problem, right? I mean, because you can imagine the variables that they're playing with. Now, can that be used in logistics or some startup that is doing something similar, where the variables are the same, but then they're solving it in a different domain? I think there's this thing called biomimicry, for instance, where we look at what happens in nature and then we see why that happens and see if you can adopt that in certain products and so on. Bullet trains, for example, in Japan, famously, they have that long snout, and it was modeled on the kingfisher. So because one of the engineers saw kingfishers like hitting the water and not really making a splash or any sound or whatever, and sort of modeled it on that to avoid any noise that any noise that happens when these trains go through the station, right? So yeah, another very interesting tweet, and definitely something people should check out.
Awesome. So before we end this week's roundup, let's talk about the two episodes which we'll be putting out this week, right? The first one is by Pankaj Rajput, who you referred over the roundup quite a few times. Pankaj is the co-founder and CTO of ZenDrive. He has over 19 plus years of experience leading teams and building core technology products that involves big data sets. Uh, in ZenDrive, he's using his expertise to dive deeper into how drivers drive, or essentially driver analytics, which he has co-founded with Jonathan Matus, and they have established the R&D center in Bangalore in 2014. So, what are some of the key topics that you addressed in your conversation with Pankaj Roshan?
Yeah, I had a lovely conversation with Pankaj. I think both Augustus and I really enjoyed this conversation. And Zendrive is doing some Fundu work. They're picking up data and signals from the mobile on driving behavior and so on, and feeding it into a couple of different use cases, right? So, for instance, how can insurers build a better risk profile of you? So amazing work. I think they've raised something like 57 million or so for their startup. And Pankaj comes from a different perspective. I mean, he's an IISc and Google alum, right? So he's a hardcore engineer. He solved those deep tech problems over the last couple of decades, but he's also a founder. Right, so he's got the business orientation as well, and it was very interesting to see that overlap come through in everything that he was talking about. For instance, I mean, he spoke about how you should structure pods as you scale from 5 or 10 engineers to a few hundred people. Then he also spoke about engineering culture, which seems to be a common theme about how you can build a culture that doesn't require processes, right? I mean, that doesn't require hard processes to tell people that this is what is expected, but rather, is implicit and people understand this and demonstrable as well. So, yeah, fantastic episode coming up with Pankaj. I think we'll probably put it out on Tuesday. I'd love for you to guys to check it out, and also let me know if there are other senior engineering leaders, especially women engineering leaders, who we should talk to. I'd love to interview them on the podcast. Um,
So the
so,
other, sorry,
yeah,
I'll
go
just
ahead.
the other episode we'll be putting out this week is the one with Pratik Poddar, who is the principal with Nexus Venture Partners. Pratik is an entrepreneur turned VC, and he's been working alongside technology entrepreneurs to impact on the lives of millions of people in India. He's most passionate about consumer community content, education, e-commerce, financial services, and healthcare startups. Some of his
Yeah.
most notable portfolio companies include the likes of Pratilipi, whose founder we had interviewed on the podcast, then Rapido, Whitehead Junior, Namaste Credit, My Upchar, and the likes, right? So again, I mean, another great notable person to have on the podcast. What are some of the top questions you'll be asking him?
Yeah, Pratik has got an impressive portfolio, right? I mean, he's the guy who's invested in White Hat Junior, Rapido, Namaste Credit, Pratilepi, as you mentioned, and others. And he has a unique perspective. I mean, every investor that we've talked to on the podcast seems to have a unique perspective. And, while the questions may remain the same, I think the rabbit hole differs in terms of what people themselves bring up on these podcasts. So I am really keen on exploring his perspective of startups, of innovation, of investing, and so on. So yeah, it should be an interesting episode to look forward to.
Right. Okay. So, very interesting point you bring up, right? The whole investor perspective. So, just one final question before we wrap up. How much do you think personal biases play a role in choosing your portfolio companies?
Well, personal biases play a role in everything, boss. So even if it's choosing your investments or whatever it is, especially with investments, right? I mean, because it also depends on temperament, it depends on your own background, and etc. I mean, Rory Sutherland often talks about how people tend to model things like it's Newtonian physics. It's not Newtonian physics, right? Things are a lot more grayer, things are a lot more messier, and you have to develop your instincts to understand this and sort of navigate this hoary mess that you've been given, right? He also has this interesting point about how markets are amazing not because they're effective or efficient, but because they're inventive. So that's something to think about. Yeah.
All right. So that's a great thought to end the this week's roundup on. Folks who have joined us, thank you so much for taking the time out on a Sunday morning. And Roshan, thank you so much for taking us through the entire news and the insights from the week. And we'll see everyone soon on 14th of March again.
This was a fun roundup. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. And do let us know what you think of our episodes and podcasts that we put out. And see you soon. Bye bye.
Right. Have a great Sunday, everyone. Bye.